Noam Chomsky's American Power and the New Mandarins is a foundational text in the critique of American foreign policy, particularly during the Vietnam War, published in 1969. This collection of essays examines the intellectual underpinnings and consequences of U.S. imperialism, with a sharp focus on the role that intellectuals, whom Chomsky refers to as the new Mandarins, play in supporting and sustaining state power. Chomsky's work serves as both a scathing indictment of U.S. policies and a call for intellectuals to exercise responsibility and engage in activism. The book emerged during a turbulent period in American history, characterized by the civil rights movement, widespread opposition to the Vietnam War, and a growing skepticism toward government institutions. Chomsky, already a prominent linguist at MIT, became a leading voice of dissent against the war and American imperialism. American Power and the New Mandarins marked his transition from academic linguistics to political activism, setting the stage for his future work as a public intellectual and critic of U.S. foreign policy. The essays in this collection address various aspects of American power and the complicity of intellectuals in upholding it. In Objectivity and Liberal Scholarship, Chomsky critiques the supposed objectivity claimed by liberal intellectuals, arguing that their work often serves to legitimize state power rather than challenge it. He contends that this bias is particularly evident in the context of the Vietnam War, where intellectuals provided justifications for U.S. aggression under the guise of scholarly neutrality. The Responsibility of Intellectuals is perhaps the most renowned essay in the book. In it, Chomsky challenges intellectuals to confront the morality of U.S. actions and take a stand against injustice. He is sharply critical of the intellectual elite, accusing them of complicity in the Vietnam War by failing to speak out against the atrocities committed by the U.S. government. Chomsky argues that intellectuals have a duty to question the narratives presented by those in power and to advocate for peace and social justice. In another essay, The Revolutionary Pacifism of A.J. Must, Chomsky reflects on the life and work of A.J. Must, a noted pacifist and anti-war activist. Chomsky uses Must's example to argue for a principled stance against war and violence, challenging the pragmatism that often dominates mainstream political thought. He believes that a moral approach, grounded in a commitment to nonviolence, is essential for resisting the destructive policies of the state. Chomsky continues his critique of intellectuals in The Objectivity of Historical Scholarship, where he examines the biases inherent in the field of history. He argues that historians often perpetuate state-sanctioned narratives and fail to critically examine the actions of powerful nations like the United States. This essay highlights Chomsky's broader concern with the role of scholarship in legitimizing state power and obscuring the realities of imperialism. In The Logic of Withdrawal, Chomsky makes a compelling case for the immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops from Vietnam. He argues that the war is not only immoral, but also strategically flawed, dismissing the notion that a gradual withdrawal or continued military presence could lead to a favorable outcome. Chomsky's analysis is rooted in a broader critique of U.S. foreign policy which he sees as driven by economic and strategic interests, rather than a genuine concern for democracy or human rights. Several key themes run throughout American Power and the New Mandarins. Central to Chomsky's argument is his critique of U.S. foreign policy, particularly its imperialist nature. He views the Vietnam War as part of a larger pattern of American aggression, driven by economic and geopolitical interests, rather than a desire to promote freedom or protect human rights. Chomsky's analysis is deeply critical of the moral justifications offered by the U.S. government and its supporters, arguing that these justifications are little more than a veneer for imperialism. Another major theme is the role of intellectuals in society. Chomsky argues that many intellectuals serve as apologists for state power, using their scholarship and influence to justify government actions. He challenges them to adopt a more critical and independent stance, urging them to speak out against injustice and use their positions to promote peace and social justice. This theme is closely tied to Chomsky's broader critique of objectivity, which he sees as a tool that often masks the biases and interests underlying scholarly work. Moral responsibility is a recurring motif in the book. Chomsky emphasizes the ethical obligations of individuals, particularly those in positions of power or influence. He argues that intellectuals have a duty to resist complicity in state violence and to advocate for the rights of the oppressed. This moral stance is evident in his critiques of liberal scholarship, which he believes often fails to address the ethical implications of supporting state power. Chomsky's critique of objectivity extends to the media and academia, where he sees a pervasive bias that serves to reinforce the status quo. He argues that much of what is presented as objective analysis is, in reality, deeply skewed to favor the interests of the powerful. This critique is particularly evident in his analysis of historical scholarship and media coverage of the Vietnam War, where he highlights the ways in which narratives are constructed to justify U.S. actions. Finally, Chomsky advocates for activism as a necessary response to U.S. imperialism and the intellectual justifications that support it. He calls for active resistance to war and violence, encouraging individuals to challenge the narratives presented by those in power and to work towards a more just and peaceful world. This call to activism is central to Chomsky's political philosophy and remains a consistent theme throughout his body of work.